Hey guys, AnimeWestReacts here. Gonna be reacting to Seraph of the End, chapter 148. So yeah, this chapter's titled Sorry If It Doesn't Work, which says a lot, I feel. But yeah, we got, starting off the chapter, Mika saying, "You have finished analyzing all the memories we stole from the past, or from the first." He raises his hand, and then this big orb appears and he says, "Oh, I get it. The stuff in my right hand, that's all the power of the light that the first had been storing in Michaela." And then Mika's like, "Huh? You know how to use that now?" And he says, "Yep, for some weird reason, I guess I still have a bit of my old angel power coursing through me." And so yeah, he said, "Look, and see this thing up in the air." And then Mika says, "Ah," and he says, "With this power of light, the power of darkness the first created, and the sinful keys, maybe I'll be able to cast all three of these spells. Spell to resurrect Michaela, spell to hide Earth away from paradise, and the spell to destroy paradise." And then he says, "But figuring out the correct order to them is trickery. Revive Michaela and those snooty angels on the thrones up top. Revive Michaela and those snooty angels on thrones will pop out of nowhere and zod us with that punishment. You know what they hit the first with." And Mika says, "Yeah, I think that was it. They popped out of nowhere, and then the first burned for ages, literally." And he says, "Yeah, he did. It looked like it sucked." He says, "So before we bring Michaela back, we have to make it so they can't see us, which means we have to use the first, right? Spell to hide the earth from the eyes of paradise." And then Mika says, "Will that really hide us though? Screw it up and it'll destroy the world, you know." And then he says, "Technically, the world's already destroyed, so if it doesn't work, it's like, oops, oh well." And then he says, "Wow, really?" And then he says, "Nah, not really. I already decided that we're gonna save all the worlds without sacrificing one more person. If it doesn't work, I'll give up." And then Mika says, "Wow, make it sound easy, why don't you? But I totally support that policy." And he says, "Thank you, thank you." And then there's like a thing. And then he says, "Okay, I think I can use the power of darkness that I got from the first for the spell of hiding." And Mika says, "Cool, you can do that with only 30% of his power that you got." And he says, "Huh, and he looks forward, we see the city, and then we have Shinoa say, "Oh." Mitsuba says, "What's up, Shinoa?" And then she laughs and says, "You're looking at us, aren't you? I can tell you." And then she says, "Don't worry, I'm on my way to save you." And he says, "Great. Think I'm gonna need 80%. And then Mika says, "Oh, really? Then we don't have enough." And he says, "Yeah, we don't." And he says, "Now what? Should we ask Shinoa?" And then Mika says, "Do you really think she'll be on board with the whole save all the worlds thing?" And he's like, "Well, we are technically friends, so maybe." And then, yeah, Mika's like, "But if you screw up, we're going to be in the same boat that the first was, the burning for little ages thing." And he says, "Yeah." And Mika says, "Knowing what Shino was like, will she let that happen? I seem to remember she was totally against you doing risky crap." And then he's like, "Yeah, she was with you on that note." And he says, "Right, she's of the same opinion as I am. She devoured the other 70% of the first power. She'll know a lot." And he says, I know. Heck, when I was thinking about how much more of a percentage I need, she noticed my thoughts. I had to hurry and cut it off." And then, yeah, he says, he's like, "What? You're connected?" And he says, yeah, she probably super duper powerful now too. That's not good. And he says, well, maybe not so much since she's all about protecting you. I'm okay with that. And he's like, come on, Mika, we're supposed to be saving all the worlds. And he's like, And then he says, we're going to resurrect all the humans and all the angels and all the everybody. Plus, we're going to hide Earth from paradise and then blow up paradise. And he's like, greedy much? Jeez. And he says, Mika says, what? So you're okay with letting Akane and the kids stay dead? And he says, no. He says, and if we only resurrect humanity, that won't bring the first back. It won't bring the vampires back either. And then Mika's like, who cares about him? And so, yeah, I read that wrong. He says, and if we only resurrect humanity, that won't bring the first back. And then Mika says, who cares about him? And then he says, it won't bring the vampires back either. And Mika says, who cares about them? And then he finishes saying, and it won't bring you back. And he says, but that Mika is technically you, though. And he's like, yeah, about that. Now that I've devoured the first, I've started to see some things. And Mika says, and so he puts his hand on his shoulder and says, somehow the two are kind of blended together. You and Mika are. That's what kept the first from finding us for so long. Yeah, he's like, we're both Mika and we're both you. So by resurrecting us, we'll both wake up. He's like, really? What a weird feeling. But do we really need to wake up? Aren't we already? He says, we kind of do if we're going to save all the worlds. And so he says, okay, 1. We use the power of darkness to hide the earth from paradise sight. 2. We use the seven sinful keys from the Seraph of the End and resurrect Michaela. 3. We use the power of light in Michaela to resurrect all the people, angels, vampires, demons, and everybody. And 4. We use the power of all the angels, the first included, and we spend about 1,000 years building a giant tower so we can use it to destroy paradise. And Mika's like shocked. And he's like, that was way too big. And he's like, you're telling me. And he's like, I don't want to go along with it. Mika's like, I don't want to do that. And he's like, right? I bet you Gurren would be all for it, though. He's like, no way. He's happy just bringing back all of humanity. He's like, I don't know. Mika says, there's a punishment for trying to resurrect all of humanity, but their experiments to control the Seraph of the End already gave them a way to control that punishment, eliminating the risk. And he says, oh. And Mika says, but because what you want to do involves bringing back the angels too, there's still a chance we get wiped out. There's no way that he'll go along with that. And he's like, really? And he says, really? He's like, well, that's petty. Yeah. And Mika says, no, I totally get the feeling. I don't want to go along with this plan. A plan this huge either. And he's like, oh, come on. And Mika says, besides, he's already screwed up and destroyed the world once. And he's like, true? So Mika says, I don't know if it's just me, but Gurren has the same look in his eyes that the first did. A look that says they're carrying the weight of the world. And he's like, oh yeah, one of those, this guy definitely screwed up looks. And yeah, Mika's like, you make it sound really lame, but yeah, exactly. It's like he's extra gloomy, and you're just stupidly sunny. He's like, I just want to save all the world. Sorry if it doesn't work. It'd be so much easier to just do it that way. Like, somehow you're even more of a pain in the butt this way. He says, whatever, anyway. So basically, 0 risk tolerance woman, moderate risk okay guy, and the pain in the butt hero wannabe duo. These are the 3 factions we've got. Right? And he says, hey, you saw, right? You know we were reborn thousands of times back before we got here. We never devoured the first before. This is our big chance. And Mika's like, well, I guess so. He's like, we could totally do it. We'll save everyone, and if we screw up, we'll just die. Isn't that awesome? Ooh, so Mika says, it'll be awesome if we pull it off, yeah. And then Yu says, besides, if we die this time, we'd get to die together. When I thought you died before, apart from me, I got all big into revenge, but this time we'll die together for sure. And if we can, that's where... Nah. And if we can, then what's there to be afraid of? Let's do it. We'll save all the worlds. And yeah, he's like, well, I guess if everybody could pull it off, it'd be some... or if anybody could pull it off, it'd be someone as stupidly cheery as you. He was like, right? I'm gonna take all the gloomy guys and chop them up. Chop, chop. And so Mika says, it's like you're always there to lift me up. And Yu says, huh? What was that? Mika says, nothing. Just saying you're dumb. And Yu says, hey, I am not dumb. Not lately. And then he says, so, Mika gets up saying, so, what do we do next? We win everything. And he says, I mean specifically. And so Yu says, come, first Mikhaila. And then he says, huh? And so yeah, he turns into the sword. Oh, that is a good panel. Good double spread. And so yeah, Yu says, ta-da, a new version. New Mika version with your curse suppressed by the first power. And he says, whoa, is it me or are you actually getting half decent? And so yeah, Yu says, right, devouring the first made me smarter too. And Mika says, though you're sounding dumber and dumber. And he says, I am not. Then Mika says, Yu, I want to change locations. Or, yeah. He says, Saito, want to go? And he says, yeah. And Mika says, isn't it kind of hectic out there? Gurren and everybody is attacking. Barrett too. And then he says, yeah. It's gotten like way more powerful. I bet he's devoured a ton of vampires. And then, yeah, Mika says, think we can beat him. And then Yu says, we'll beat everyone. And Mika's like, I feel stupid for asking. And so yeah, Yu says, let's go show the world our new power, Mika. And he says, okay. And we saw hallway. And so yeah, we got Yu waking up. And Saito dragging him. Says, finally awake. That was some time to pick for a nap. And then Yu says, I was asleep. And then Saito says, what of the knowledge you got from the first? And Yu says, I've absorbed everything I devoured from him. It's totally possible to save all the worlds. And he says, really? That's wonderful. But that means that assumes we survived this, though. And then Yu says, hup. And summons a sword. Okay, I'll show you our new power then. As Gurren is here. And he's like, hey Gurren. And he says, hi Yu. Hey Yu, are you the enemy? And he says, your dream's resurrecting all of humanity, right? And then Gurren says, right, help me with it. And then Yu says, well, I'm your enemy then. That's the chapter. Whew. So yeah, pretty good chapter. We got a lot of build up to Yu putting his plan into motion, deciding what he's going to do. And Shinoa catching a glimpse of Yu, deciding to say she's going to come save him. We got what the three factions are: the zero tolerance, the moderate, and Yu and Saito. But yeah, hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like on it, sub the channel, hit that notification bell, and I'll see y'all next month. So,